So can she sort of have a separate contingency fund?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the council briefing of the 5th of October 2021. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. In terms of members on leave or apologies, we are just waiting for Councillor Dan Loden to join us via Zoom, but believe he will be attending shortly. So that takes us to public question time. So welcome to members of the public gallery this evening. It's great to see you here. We now open the microphone for you during public question time. We just ask that when you approach the microphone that you state your name, the suburb in which you live and the item that you're speaking to, and we do allow 3 minutes. So no set order, just whoever wishes to come forward first. Over to you. Yes, of course.
My name's Lindley Cohen and I live in Ruth Street, Perth. I want to speak to item 5.4. I've read the odour consultant's report that's verified residents' claims of odour pollution, and I note that the business has been given notice requiring the cooking odours from the premises to be abated by the 23rd of November. The report's thorough, and the statement that the capture in the grease filters meets the Australian standards. However, it concludes that the air is still loaded with odorous compounds and remaining particles which can impact surrounding residences. I also want to comment that on at least 2 dates of the odour patrols, which concluded that the odour dispenses without any ground level impact or subtle levels at a distance of up to 80 metres, the smell in my house was strong enough for me to make a diary note. Now, once the odour's inside my house, no amount of air freshener or oil burning can mask the smell that lingers for hours. I do have more diary notes, but they don't coincide with any of the odour patrols. By the 23rd of November, it will be 12 months that the neighbourhood has endured this odour, which I have stated here previously, impacts on both the mental and physical well-being of residents. The outcome being sought by residents is the cessation, not just the dilution of this polluting odour. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindley. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, David McLaughlin from Perth, Western Australia. I know some of you, obviously I'm an architect, but I, in this instance, I'm speaking just as a resident who has an interest in item 5.1, which is number 26 Moor Street, Perth, a DA that's for consideration. I just wanted to mention a couple of points that relate back to the report that's in front of you and just reiterate a couple of the heritage aspects of it. The house sits with an important 26 Moor Street, within an important heritage precinct, a very important heritage precinct. The house has itself heritage value, but the precinct does as well. Should go, may go without saying, but I'll mention it, that the heritage significance of this precinct is of the highest level of significance. It's under management category A of the MHI, City of Vincent's MHI. It's on the permanent register of the state register, the Heritage Council. It was on the register of the National Estate, which is now the National Heritage Database, and it's been recognised internationally by UNESCO in terms of its cultural heritage conservation. So to me, it's obvious that the precinct is very important. It's not just the individual house. The individual house is important, but it's this collection of these 58 cottages together that's particularly important. My concern is that I have a concern that that doesn't come through as a strong theme in the report that's in front of you for consideration tonight. There are obviously many intact, authentic late 20th century houses in Perth, Subiaco, north Fremantle, East Fremantle, whatever. But this is the last remaining intact precinct of this late 19th century Federation era working class housing, actually in the entire of Australia, not just in Perth. Hence its high level of significance. In terms of the design itself, rather than of the that's before you, I have no problems with that. I think the design's well done. It's difficult to extend onto heritage buildings within the requirements of the Borough Charter and so forth. I don't contend that it's poor design. My contention is that it's still a two-storey design, which is very problematic under the heritage framework. All of the various heritage listings and conservation plan documentation refer to the importance of this precinct absolutely being linked to the dwellings being modestly scaled, repetitive, identical in form, working class accommodation, and including the City of Vincent's Brookman and Moor Street development guidelines. And there are currently no two-storey dwellings in there. This will be the first. So, from my concern, that's the precedent this will set will be a big concern. I believe that it's premature to be considering it while the report doesn't have this theme coming across. The report that's in front of you talks only about the dwelling, really not about the precinct and the other things. And I do have some concern, some really serious concerns about that. The last thing I'd just like to say was that, if I may, just for a few seconds, that it was the City of Vincent who previously initiated a downzoning of the precinct from R40 to R25 as an attempt to ensure that the community had the correct expectations, appropriate expectations of development potential of the precinct. At that time, it was contentious. There was a lot of discussion as whether that would be appropriate. It was a courageous and insightful thing of the City of Vincent to do, and it's important to remember why that was done. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Ryan Darby from Hatch Roberts Day, and I'm speaking on behalf of EG, who are the owners of 40 Frame Court in Leadville, in regards to item 5.2. The site was purchased by EG in 2018 with the view of renewing the site for a mixed-use residential development, including build-to-rent and build-to-sell apartments, in addition to community infrastructure and public domain enhancement. Since 2018, EG and the project team have been working in close collaboration with the City of Vincent, Leadville Connect and other stakeholders, including the Water Corporation, in preparing the local development plan. We thank the City officers, Leadville Connect and the other stakeholders for their acceptance and participation in the collaborative approach. And we propose to continue this collaboration through the preparation of the development application once the building is being constructed. The preparation of the LDP has been undertaken in parallel with the preparation of the Leadville Precinct Structure Plan. And it is evident that the two documents are complementary to each other in respect to their aspirations for delivering the highest quality design outcomes possible for Leadville, whilst retaining the Leadville eclectic character and maximising community benefits. A couple of issues that came out in regards to the precinct structure plan. It's noted that a portion of the proposed building exceeds the 23-storey height limit stated in the PSP by 2 stories. So one portion of the building at 25 stories. However, this portion of the building does not exceed the overall height limit stated in the PSP of 82 metres. We're at 81.9 metres. And just in regards to the format of the local development plan, the levels on the LDP are at AHD, so Australian height datum. They're not the actual height itself. So it states 96 metres, but the maximum building height component will only be 81.9 metres, so below the 82. The proposed development does not impact on the adjoining properties in respect to overshadowing and privacy, and the visual impact assessment prepared to support the LDP demonstrates that the overall visual impact ranges from negligible to moderate, depending on the vantage point. And we took 8 different vantage points in proximity to the site. And importantly, the impact from the vantage points on Oxford Street are considered to be negligible and low, which obviously Oxford Street is the most important vantage point. The community benefits embedded in the LDP include a proportion of affordable housing, which will cater for a range of demographics, including key workers. The provision of 2 publicly accessible plazas and a pedestrian access way, which will facilitate the activation of the western elevation onto the Frame Court car park. There's also the ground floor tenancies provided for an arts and culture, co-working and community uses. Each of these benefits were identified as needed within the Leadville area by the social infrastructure study that we prepared as part of the LDP process in collaboration with the City officers, Leadville Connect and the wider community. The LDP has been presented to the City's Design Review Panel on 5 occasions, And we are very pleased that the LDP was given the green lights for all 10 design principles at the final meeting of the DRP in August last year. Can I just continue? We look forward to working with the DRP through the development application stage. EG, including its chairman, Dr.
Ryan, you have reached your 3 minutes, so if you wouldn't mind making some final statements, that would be appreciated.
EG, including its chairman, Dr. Michael Eason, would obviously very much like to have attended the meeting, but because of COVID restrictions was unable to. So if I could please read this brief statement. EG acknowledges the renewal of the site represents a significant redevelopment opportunity for Leederville, and we do not take this responsibility lightly. Post any LDP approval, we're very much looking forward to progressing the detailed design and preparation of the development application for lodgement with the city. I'd like to reassure the council that we continue to work closely with the community members at the DA phase, including the city and Leederville Connect, and this will allow further refinement of the overall design in addition to the community infrastructure and civic domain improvements. EG would like to thank the city again and its staff for the professional manner in which the LDP has been managed and for the opportunity to address council at this evening's briefing session.
Thanks, Ryan.
If you have any questions, I've got myself and also Dominic Snellgrove, the project architect as well.
Okay, we don't sort of usually run it that way, but any questions that we raise during the briefing tonight, our administration will be able to tic-tac with you during the week. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, councillors. Alan Stewart. Following on from David McLaughlin speaking earlier, I'm the applicant tonight for the item 5.1, 26 Moor Street additions. I'm also speaking here as the landowner on this occasion, as opposed to being a planning consultant. We purchased a house in 2014, and in 2018, we took under extensive conservation works to the front of the house. We did receive funding for those works from the Heritage Council and the city, which we're grateful for, to a value of $90,000. And as you know, that's match funding. So we did spend the same amount plus some on top of that. It's important to note that all 5 rooms in the original part of the house remain intact, with no internal walls having been removed. Some houses in the precinct have removed those walls to create larger living spaces or retrofitted bathrooms to create more contemporary living standards. That's quite important. We wish to retain the fabric of the original 5 rooms, and that's one of the reasons why we wish to undertake the proposed addition in the form that it is. When we purchased the house, one of the unique features we noticed was the elevation of the house above natural ground level, which presents the opportunity to undertake a split level addition at the rear without compromising the heritage fabric and streetscape of the precinct. And it is unique in that regard. I'm not aware of any other houses that have that elevation above the ground level at the rear. The proposed addition satisfies the applicable building height limit, and the guidelines do not preclude a 2-storey addition. The test is whether any works to the rear of the house are compatible with the streetscape and heritage significance of the place. The guidelines require that any addition not be visible over the ridge line of the existing house when viewed from the property line directly opposite the site, at a height of 1.65 metres. The proposed addition satisfies this requirement, and both the State Heritage Office and the city's own independent heritage advisor have endorsed the proposed design. We've worked very hard with our architect, and I strongly believe and genuinely believe that the proposed addition will have very little impact on the streetscape and the heritage fabric of the area. As you would see from the agenda item, the original design proposed white brick walls with 2 gable roof elements, and the height of the walls extended above the height of the walls of the existing house. And to be totally honest, we were not 100% happy with that design outcome, and we really felt we could do better. The design was advertised to 78 people, and a total of 13 submissions were received, of which 7 were objections. That was enough for us to go back to the drawing board. We engaged a new architect, and we took a much simpler approach, which we think is much more respectful to the existing house and the streetscape. We've basically worked with the height of the existing walls to the existing house and extended that back. And then we've modified the roof design so that the addition appears more like an attic style as opposed to a full 2-storey addition. And that's particularly important when viewed from Moor Street between the houses. We've also decided to run with a red face brick, which we think it won't be an exact replica of the existing bricks, but we think it will be a much better outcome that'll help the addition blend into its surrounds. The rear elevation still reaches a white rendered wall. I've spoken to one of my neighbours who I think raised a comment about that, and we're quite keen just to proceed with a red face brick to the entire extension. And that's what we'd intend to do. It's a much simpler design and it's not trying to make a statement. And I think after after the amended designs were advertised, I think there were only 2 submissions made. As I understand it, and I think it's more or less what David said before, the concern seems to relate more to the precedence of 2 stories rather than the particular aspects of this application in front of you. And that's the important thing for you to consider. If I could speak briefly in a couple of residential design code issues. The report mentions the overshadowing variation. The R codes are actually amended in July to exclude from overshadowing calculations the shadow from a side boundary fence. That's been overlooked both by myself and the staff. It was quite a recent addition. When you take out the shadow from the fence, the actual amount of overshadowing complies with the R codes. The side setback, there's only a variation there because of the way setbacks are calculated. That's because the existing house has existing openings to habitable rooms, and it says there's a 4 metre setback requirement. When you calculate the setback of the addition in itself, it actually complies with the R codes.
Alan, you have reached 3 minutes,
Oh,
so
okay,
if you wouldn't mind concluding, that would be great.
I will conclude that the upper floor actually complies. And if you include the veranda in the open space calculation, it also achieves the 50% requirement. So I hope you're able to support the application in front of you at next week's council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And Ryan, apologies, I neglected to get a suburb from you. That's fine. Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Dudley Meyer Highgate, it's item 6.2, the tender for tree watering and planting. So I really have a question, why the in-house cost comparison is confidential. There's no reason for it to be confidential. It's not revealing any information that you could consider to be commercial in confidence, which is the usual excuse for making things confidential. It's important that you do the right thing, but also that you are seen to do the right thing. There's nothing to hide, so this information should be made in the public. The norm should be that things are in the public and you argue to make them confidential, not the other way around, which is what seems to be happening here. By making it confidential, it looks as if the city's employees can't compete with private enterprise on even the simplest of activities. This is not what you'd call a highly skilled activity that needs rare skills. Also, if the attachment is confidential, the community can't see the assumptions that have been made and whether they're reasonable or unreasonable. If you want to be accountable, you have to be transparent, and this is not being transparent. So as I said before, there's no reason for this to be confidential, and council should show some leadership and insist that it's made public. Thank you.
Thanks, Dudley. As you know, that was an administrative decision, and happy to ask those questions. Are there any further speakers this evening? Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for your comments and for attending this evening. Just to let you know, the way that we then deal with items is to go through them in the order in which they've been raised by members of the public gallery. So your items will be called forward and dealt with first. But before we get to that, I'll just go to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Thank you through you, Mayor Cole. Just one declaration of interest received from Councillor Hallett in impartiality interest in relation to item 5.5, the Public Health Plan review. Councillor Hallett notes that a report refers to the case study that Vincent developed for the Public Health Advocacy Institute, which is based at Curtin. And from a couple of months ago, Councillor Hallett has been engaged to do some work with the Institute on strategy and capacity building. That's the only declaration received tonight.
Thank you, CEO. Are there any last minute declarations? No. Okay, thanks, everyone. That takes us to our questions and answers on items of business this evening. So the first item raised this evening was item 5.4, response to petition relating to odour from 7 Grams Chicken, which is number 212 to 214 Lake Street, Perth. Just before taking questions, just to sort of note that this is actually a compliance matter, and it is unusual for a compliance matter to be dealt with in this manner, and that this report is for noting, and it is because it was in response to a petition of residents. So just please bear that in mind in terms of dealing with this item this evening. Council members, any questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. It was a really good report from the odour consultant, so thanks to the city for commissioning that. I just had a question really around the mitigation options that are left for 7 grams. Like, it does appear that they're almost out of options really. But I guess the limitation on increasing the stack height, which was one of the earlier options proposed by the consultant, said was a planning limitation for Vincent. Like, I'm not sure if this can be answered in this forum, but would we consider, I guess, adjusting our planning requirements around stack height in this instance?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. It is an option. There are a number of options, but that is an option. The built form policy sets out some deemed to comply standards around heights, which a stack of that height would exceed. But that's not to say it's not an option that can't be explored. But clearly the current planning framework states that the height of that stack would be outside of what is expected and what the vision is for that street. I'd also note that the existing stack that's on the building doesn't have planning approval and is probably has concerns around its visual impact already. So I think in that context, it's a difficult one, but it's the options on the table. There's nothing stopping the applicant and the operator from exploring that further.
Councillors, questions? No, I'm just sorry, I'm just going to check my notes. I'm just, given that this is now a matter that's being actioned and that there's potential review, I just guess in terms of outlining for the purposes of residents here tonight, that and there's a live action, there's a potential for that to be sought to be reviewed by the owner at the SAT. Perhaps you could just talk us through what sort of happens from here.
Sure, thank you, Mayor Cole, to you. So like many notices that are issued, they're subject to appeal provisions, which means that the person who the notice has been issued on can apply to the State Administrative Tribunal for a review of the matter. That's universal across the board, so it hasn't been ruled out. It could still be possible. And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, I guess just second to that, because Lindley Cohen has tonight raised concerns about the 12 months since it was initially reported, and just to provide some kind of potential guidance to residents about how long this matter may play out for. I know some is within the control of the city and some is outside, but it might just be useful to give a bit of an indication of what timeframes we may be looking at.
Yeah, so to you, Mayor Cole, the notice must be complied with by the 23rd of November. If there is an appeal to SAT, then it may delay that due date to enable the hearing to be heard. Once the compliance date has been reached, we will make a decision on what the next stages would be. Under the Health Act, it can include taking it to the courts, or there may be provisions to issue a further notice, but we'll explore that once we reach that date. So the 23rd of November is the date, but it may be affected if there is a SAT appeal.
Thank you, Manager. And I note that you've been giving regular updates to residents. I'm assuming at that date, once that date passes, that there'll be a further update to residents just to let them know the status of that notice.
Yeah, to you, Mayor Cole, we've been providing the residents with a fortnightly update. It's not fortnightly anymore as the notice has now been issued, but if things change, then we can let residents know.
Okay, thanks very much, Manager. Are there any further questions? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just a clarification on a statement in page 1 or page 1 of the report. Just says that the current flume requires. So just wanted to see whether that's a typo, whether it was referring to the current flume or what it actually what it actually pertains to is what is actually required. Just found that I didn't quite understand that statement.
Through you, Mayor Cole, what that means is the height of the flume is not considered to be minor nature development, so a development approval would be required for it in its current form. We just haven't pursued it to date because we wanted to resolve the odour issue first.
Any further questions, Councillor Hallett?
Just a follow up to that through you, Mayor, possibly to planning instead. Given that that would require a retrospective application, and I think from previous discussions we've had that we don't stop businesses trading during that application process unless there's a health and safety issue. Is there grounds for us to prevent use of the flume at the moment?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the reason why we've allowed that to continue operating is because it's actually reduced the impact of the odour. So previously there was no stack and flume, so the odour that was being released was worse because it wasn't being treated. So this was an attempt to try and address the issue. It hasn't resolved the issue, and the odour report sets out why that is. So we are pursuing that planning matter now that we've issued this notice and have an understanding of what the options are. Hopefully that resolves or helps resolve the issue as well.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Question to Health Manager for Health. In terms of precedent or otherwise, are we aware of any either case law or circumstances in local government, in terms of local government notices, either in Western Australia or in other jurisdictions where a similar notice has been issued and has either been challenged or remedied successfully? Are we aware? Are we treading new ground here, or is it something that we're aware of that there is precedent elsewhere?
Through you, Mayor Cole, to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any other notice that sets a precedent for this. So potentially it is treading new ground. If it does go to the SAT, then it would really provide guidance for many local governments in the future.
And just for clarity, the principle, not of the odour and the measurements that's been established, but the principle of nuisance is an established legal principle, is my understanding. But whether the results of this report and what has been reported anecdotally and measured as a result of the work of the consultant, am I correct that that's the issue of contention? Is what actually defines nuisance?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. Look, nuisance definitions are fairly challenging to prove. I think we've gone for the gold standard here in terms of having a subject matter expert actually investigate this matter and gather the evidence to present to us. So we feel satisfied that we're following the right pathway and that there is a deemed nuisance. I think that in terms of the science to support the notice, we've done better than most circumstances to reach that burden of proof.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you very much, Manager of Health and Director. Appreciate that. We'll move on to the next item raised, which is 5.1, number 26, Moor Street, Perth, proposed alterations and additions to a single house. Questions, please. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I've got a couple of questions. My first question is, if there wasn't a flaw in the proposed addition, given the height of the ceiling and the height of the existing building, so if it was a one-storey, single-storey renovation with high ceilings, would there be any practical difference in terms of the assessment? So the fact that I understand there are 2 stories of living located within it, but in terms of the height and the ground level and the elevation that exists, what defines it as 2 stories?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in regards to the question on would the assessment have a different result, it wouldn't, as 2 stories is permitted in this area. The overall height of the addition is 6.2 metres, 8 metres is permitted. So the fact that it is 2 stories rather than 1 does not have any bearing on the assessment.
Thank you. And just further to that, the statement, and there was some comments made around by Mr. McLaughlin in relation to the precinct or the report dealing with the proposal, not the precinct. And obviously as a planning application, I understand that's what it's supposed to do. But in terms of the precinct and specifically the statement, so the first reason that's provided for the heritage significance talks about being a almost complete example of late 19th century streets of modestly scaled residential buildings. Is modestly scaled defined at all? And I ask that in that whilst 2 stories is permissible, so it's not excluded by policy. What does modestly scaled mean in terms of that significance if it doesn't mean that a 2nd story is not considered to be out of scale? I'm curious as to how we would interpret what modestly scaled means.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we would refer to the height, the scale and the bulk of the development, and if it was in line with the surrounding context to see if that was match that modestly scaled development that exists, and we believe it does, considering the fact that it does not go beyond the current height of the existing building.
Thank you. My last question relates to materiality or materials and finishes. The applicant spoke of potentially changing the rear to be consistent with what's proposed, which is the red brick, and also noted that it obviously wouldn't be an exact replica. At what point does, I understand the planning application is different from the building license, but in terms of the significance and its visibility from the adjoining street, from the perpendicular street, and from the neighbouring properties, at what point does red brick that gets close enough to almost become faux become of concern to the city? And at what point do we potentially have any say in what those materials can or cannot be, given the nature of the street and the significance of it, and also and I understand the applicant's intent, and they have faith in their ability to make that selection. But in terms of at what point does it become potentially faux in terms of that red brick and trying to emulate the existing in the new edition?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. It's a very good question. The test is whether or not the city considers it to be, administration considers it to be a minor change. And that is defined really by whether the materials proposed meet the intent of the development approval. And it's an issue we have all the time when applicants change the materials they're using from what was on the development approval to what is in the building plans, or what they actually start constructing the development with, because they can't get another material. So it's about whether the outcome that they're seeking is achieved or not. So if from the adjoining property and from the street, the outcome appears to be the same, then we wouldn't consider that to be a significant change, and it wouldn't require planning approval. If there was a difference visibly and it didn't align with the intent of the plans that were approved, then that would require a planning approval. It's a difficult one, but that's the way the planning framework works.
Okay, thank you. I guess so that covers the white wall to brick part of the question, but I guess the question of whether, if the intent is to have red brick that is complementary to the existing building and the 1800s architectural form, but not to replicate, which is at what point can the neighbours, or we as the potentially, or the determining authority, at what involvement and at what point do we get an understanding of exactly what that will be and what is or is not acceptable in terms of potentially replicating what exists, which according to both our policy and the heritage guidelines, once you get beyond the point of being complementary and starting to mimic existing heritage, or actually detract from the heritage character?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. My view is that's covered off by the fact that by the assessment that's been undertaken by State Heritage Office, our heritage expert, the officers, and the plans that have been put in front of you. I think those plans cover off on that issue because they set out what the materials are that are proposed. And clearly, if there was a change, we would need to, if there was a change to the materials, we would need to refer that through to each of those experts before we would form a view of whether it was a significant change and warranted an amendment to the DA that would come back to council or not.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I've noted the comments from Mr. Stewart and from the manager in relation to the height of the additions not exceeding the height of the existing development on the site. I just wanted to check, though, that from the elevations, it does appear that there is some visibility of, I guess I would call it the west-facing roof line of the roof area of the extension. And I just wanted to perhaps in the briefing notes to get an assessment of what percentage of the overall roof form will be visible from the street, noting that I believe the intention of the, as stated in the guidelines, is that new additions shouldn't be visible from the street. It does obviously go in to talk about the 1.65 metres, etc., but the last sentence in that paragraph does talk to new additions not being visible. So I'd just like to get an understanding of what small percentage that might be.
Do you, Mayor Cole? We can provide that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Just to follow up to the one about consideration of the broader precinct and the modest scale, is there any consideration in those in that area around the size of I guess non-built form in terms of landscape and gardens and consistency around the precinct about footprint of building as opposed to just the height issue?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, absolutely. We have identified that due to the fact that this addition would be replacing a lot of hard stand itself, the actual footprint increase is only 16.5 square metres. So we don't see that as a large extension, I suppose, in regards to footprint. As you can see outlined in the report, the open space provision is still quite significant. So we have looked at that in detail.
Thank you. What consideration can council give to setting of a precedent around 2 stories in the precinct in terms of making a decision?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I wouldn't say that this would set a precedent, as it is not going against any of the policies, both for the area or for the heritage management policy that the city has. Therefore, as this does not go above and beyond and it is deemed to comply within that, it is not setting a precedent. I would not recommend.
And just wondering, are you able to comment, and maybe in the briefing notes, or whether it's a change to the report around the overshadowing changes that were mentioned by the public gallery?
Through you, Mayor Cole, absolutely, we will look into that.
Can I just have a follow-up question on overshadowing? So that was one of the things I was just seeking a little bit more information on. It talks about solar access, 37% overshadowing. We've had the issue of fencing being raised and whether that actually can be calculated as contributing to overshadowing, which you said you'll look into, thank you. But I was also just seeking some clarity, because the report talks about the additional 14% on top of the existing overshadowing, and that 38 square metres of the outdoor space of the neighbour is overshadowed. But from the shadow diagram, it wasn't really clear to me what is within that space and what is actually overshadowed. I know there were some words around it, but I just couldn't quite work out exactly what's being overshadowed in the outdoor area of the neighbour.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can relook at that and either include some more words or perhaps another diagram in the briefing notes.
Thank you very much. Councillors, Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. A few of my queries have been covered off already, but just to echo Mayor Cole's request around additional detail on the overshadowing, and I guess to specifically request an updated diagram. I think the wireframe model that was presented in the drawings didn't really adequately show which areas of the neighbouring lot were going to be overshadowed. And then, so the question then is, I guess the deemed to comply guideline is 25% overshadowing. What's being proposed here is 50% more overshadowing than that. And the development guidelines for the precinct do bring up as an objective to pay particular regard to overshadowing requirements. So I guess in light of that, the deemed to comply standards, which it doesn't meet, and pulling that objective out in the development guidelines, if just have some further information or discussion from admin around why such a significant deviation is deemed acceptable in this instance.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can touch on that now and include those details in the briefing notes. It would be because of the areas that are overshadowed on that property and it not having a large impact on the amenity of that property. And we can include some details on that in the briefing notes.
Thanks. Oh, sorry.
Continue.
Thanks. My next question was around streetscape impact. So we've been presented with a long section that shows the 1.65 metre viewing height. And from that perspective, all of the additions are obscured by the quite high roof pitch of the original dwelling. My question was around whether, I guess, like deviations from that straight on viewing perspective are considered in streetscape impacts, because I note, I guess, there's a walkway down the southern side of this lot, and the southern neighbouring lot also has an adjacent walkway. So there'd be a 3 metre or so distance between those buildings. And through that space, the new additions would be clearly visible through Moir Street. So is that a valid way of looking at streetscape impacts?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we definitely do consider how the addition would be viewed from all angles, and we have assessed those. And it is, although as we see in that diagram from Moir Street, it is not visible on places such as Robertson Avenue and coming up from the south. The view was deemed minimal, both by the DRP and also going back to notes of the materials used and the fact that they align with the fact of respecting that overall precinct as a whole, as well as making sure that they are identifiable as new works. So that's why we do not see them as an issue of being visible, because that visual impact is extremely minor.
Okay, so they are visible, but the impacts are deemed minor. Okay. All right. And then, my last question, I was again struggling like a few people around what a modest scale means and how that could really be assessed. I thought it maybe came down to open space as well. So I understand it meets deemed to comply. I think proposing 46% open space, something like that. I was wondering, I guess, on top of the deemed to comply assessment, whether we could undertake an assessment of a few other houses in that lot and see if this is of relatively immodest scale. It covers a significantly larger footprint than other development in that area.
Through you, Mayor Cole, on the first point of what we're looking at above and beyond the deemed to comply standards, it really is the policy objectives, especially considering that there is a specific policy, of course, for the Brookman and Moir precinct, and this development both within the open space provision and the bulk and scale through the building height does meet those policy objectives.
Could I still get some info in the briefing notes, just a rough estimate of average open space in the Moir Street precinct?
Could I make a suggestion in the report, and this goes to the request of excuse me, of Mr. McLaughlin. It does talk about the Heritage Council statement of significance for the Brookman and Moir precinct, and that's where it sort of talks about things like the homogeneity of the modestly scaled semi-detached residential building centres. And I completely understand that administration has assessed this as a development against the the guidelines, but I thought this is really about that precinct, the impact on the precinct. So I thought potentially administration could add some words in response to that statement of significance, dealing with some of these issues around I'm going to stop. Homogeneity, thank you, CEO. The homogeneity, the modestly scaled, semi-detached residence, and the visually striking precinct. So I think it is really about looking at it as the individual property in relation to the guidelines, but also having some commentary around any potential impact on the statement of significance for the precinct.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can absolutely include that. We have included some comments about the form being respectful of that overall precinct and the cultural heritage values of the precinct being maintained, and this development not taking away from that, but we can build on that through the briefing notes.
Thank you, Manager. Any further questions? Okay, I had a couple. They've probably been covered off. I'll just check. I did have a question around if residents in the area were broadly of the view, and noting that we're assessing this against the current planning framework, but if two-storey developments became an issue that residents of the Brookman-Moir precinct wish to pursue, what would be the instrument for them to do that? Would it be the existing development guidelines, or would it be through an avenue like a establishment of a heritage area? Would they need to add an additional instrument, or could they talk to the city about the existing guidelines?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we could definitely talk about the existing guidelines and looking at that policy, and if that is still relevant or if that needs to be reviewed to reflect the community sentiment as it is today.
Thank you. And also just in relation to the 7-day advertising, noting that was a tight turnaround and that we do have statutory deadlines to be met, which is understandable. Have there been any further responses received outside of that 7-day advertising period that were late?
To you, Mayor Cole, no, there wasn't.
Okay, thank you. And also, I guess just to ask the question, just so that we're absolutely clear, if the council were to have a view that 2 stories was not preferred in the precinct, and this were to be reviewed by the SAT, would we have a chance of upholding that in that review forum?
To you, Mayor Cole, as we are reviewing what's in front of us in relation to the planning framework and the policies that we have before us, this development meets those policy objectives and the height permitted in the area.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any further questions? Okay, we shall move on to item 5.2, number 40, Frame Court Leederville, proposed local development plan. This is a very comprehensive document, so could lead to lots of questions. Has been a body of work over some considerable time. So opening up for questions. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you. I'll just kick off with, can you talk me through the deep soil provision on the site? I believe they're providing 135 square metres in lieu of 430.6. And I believe that, so there is something of a shortfall, and I'm not sure that we've listed that correctly in the body of the report. Can I just get some clarification on that?
Absolutely. Through you, Mayor Cole, as has been stated, the deep soil areas, as per the R codes, the requirement is 10% of the site area, which would be 430.6 square metres. The proposal in front of us provides 135 square metres. So the difference, as outlined in the report, is that's 6% difference, as 10% is required.
Okay, so it's 6.9% difference of the entire site, but if they're actually, based on what they should be providing, they're actually 69% short on that figure, or 68.6.
Through you, Mayor Cole, it is a difference as they are meant to be providing 10%, they are short 6.9%.
Yeah, of the entire site. Yeah,
Correct.
correct. And in terms of the community benefit incentives, it talks in relation to the provision of public art, a potential public art space. And there's some words within the LDP in relation to the utilisation of % for art funds towards the fit out, establishment, etc. If this wording was to be retained as written, would it be possible for there to be no actual art provided as part of this development, inclusive of the % for art contribution?
Through you, Mayor Cole, as written, what could be provided for that % for art provision would be the space itself, not necessarily the art within it. It would be possible for it to be the space, yes.
And the creation of such a space is also being utilised in the assessment of community benefit for additional height under the, well, for the height as per the, I guess, the provisions of the recently adopted structure plan. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, under the draft precinct structure plan, I believe it's number 9 of the additional criteria, we have allocated 10 points, possible points for the provision of that space.
I'll just foreshadow an amendment for next week in relation to the wording around what the % for art contribution can be utilised for, just to make sure that it's clear that it is for the provision of perhaps like art or art curation rather than the space itself. And then my other question related to the 1.5 metre setback to the car park that would then bind the adjoining landholder potentially if a public thoroughfare was to be created. Am I correct that the structure plan requires a 4 metre wide public walkway or thoroughfare to be created if the 40 points of community benefit allocation are to be realised? And the current LDP has a 1.5 metre land setback or ceding of land. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, to provide some details on that, yes, the current draft precinct structure plan has a provision of providing a minimum width of a 4 metre pedestrian laneway. This proposal would see the creation of a 3 metre pedestrian laneway, noting that administration supports and believes that 3 metres in this location specifically would be effective and suitable. The creation of the 3 metre laneway would be, yes, shared of the 2 lots, 1.5 metres being provided on the LDP that's in front of us and 1.5 metres being provided by the adjacent land, which is currently being owned by the city.
Should council not be of a view that the full complement of community benefit points be allocated for the provision of a 1.5 metre space in lieu of a 4 metre space, how would the LDP need to be modified to reflect that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the LDP would not need to be modified, but the report would need to be modified to outline what, how the proposal was gaining their additional criteria through the precinct structure plan and how those points would be allocated.
But if the LDP, which is the thing we're approving, isn't modified, then essentially it's my understanding that from what is before us in the LDP, the 100 points to get to the additional height hasn't been reached. So if you don't accept the 40 points allocated for community benefit for the creation of the laneway. So I guess I'm searching for some potential options between now and next week for if council are not accepting that a 1.5 metre thoroughfare should receive the full community benefit allocation, what can be done between now and next week to ensure that we have an LDP that, if it's going to deliver an applicant additional height, also delivers binding community benefits as per the other elements that are in the LDP.
Through you, Mayor Cole, apologies. I'm understanding where you are now. What I was kind of trying to say is that the wording around the provision of that laneway would not need to be amended in the LDP because that could remain and the points associated to it could be assessed by yourselves. But what would need to require is another element of the LDP to be provided that matches that additional criteria within the leadable precinct structure plan.
Okay. Well, I guess I hope that we can do that in the next week. That would be great. And then
Councillor Gonczewski, do you want to give an indication of what point value you think should be apportioned so that could then form the basis of a potential amendment? And do you have any ideas on what could be brought in to compensate?
Administration have provided the view that a 3 metre wide thoroughfare in this circumstance would be appropriate. So I would think that half the points would be appropriate. So 20 points would go to each side of the line, so to speak.
And then where would that, so to the manager, where would that leave the total points if 20 was removed?
To Mayor Cole, at the moment, 100 points is required. The LDP has 110 points. It would leave the LDP with 90 points.
Okay, and so could there be some discussion with the applicant this week about how that 10 points might be made up, and potentially if that could be under sustainability measures?
To you, Mayor Cole, absolutely, we'll have those discussions.
And just one final thing, I note in relation to the community benefit elements that are the community facilities that and I can't remember the words, a strategy is required to be approved prior to the occupancy of the development that looks at, I guess, the operational elements of those facilities, including financing. And I I note that is a different, I guess, time point than the other community benefit elements which are required to be approved as part of any development approval, and would want to foreshadow an amendment in relation to bring that element of the community benefits in line with the others so that these things can be assessed as part of the development approval where the additional height is, or not, where I guess the I think that would be more appropriate. And just if you have any comments in relation to that.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. Absolutely, we do see that the public facilities management strategy would be quite integral to this part of the community benefit to ensure that it aligns with the intent as well as the city's long-term financial plan and draft asset management sustainability strategy. So we will have those discussions with the applicant and determine the best next steps forward.
Councillor Topperberg and then Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Might be an odd one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And I understand Mr. Snellgrove is here and he may have some contribution to the question during the week and it can be provided in the briefing notes. I understand that the request was made to offset the towers in the way that it's been done, but the orientation of the eastern tower is pretty much in a northwesterly direction, if you look at it in that way. And I'm just concerned at the height in relation to potential wind tunnelling noise or otherwise, because it pretty much mirrors the sou'wester at 80 odd metres in the air. I'm just curious as to what that experience would be like, both for the future occupants of the eastern tower, but also potentially the properties to the north, if it's creating a tunnelling effect for the southwesterly wind, because there'll be nothing to the south that will break it. It effectively channels it through that break. I have a very limited understanding of this field, but I also know what it's like to be on the either in or amongst large buildings that are oriented in the southwesterly direction in Western Australia, and it can be quite windy. Just curious as to whether consideration has been given and what that impact would potentially be, and if that is the ideal orientation for that eastern tower.
Through you, Mayor, I'll have to provide those in the briefing notes.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I have a question about the deep soil and on-structure planting. So there's mention of the shortfall in terms of deep soil areas, but the report appears to say that that is offset by the provision of an excess of on-structure planting and additional trees. I'm just wondering if you could give us some indication either now or in the briefing notes about whether those three things equate, and in terms of the environmental benefit of, say, deep soil planting versus on-structure plantings, because there's lots of mention in the report about the on-structure planting softening the appearance, but I'm just wondering if that also has the environmental benefit that's of equal value to deep soil planting.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can answer that now. That on-structure planting does match, if not match, but go above in regards to the percentage provided to offset that, as your first question. From an environmental point of view, in the first instance, we would see that on-structure planting would not have the same effect as the deep soil in regards to the heat island effect, but depending on how that growed, we would have to assess that as the years were to go on.
So I guess I'm just seeking clarification that we're not necessarily saying that the shortfall in deep soil is made up by the excess of on-structure planting, that those two don't sort of cancel each other out.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we are saying that due to the on-structure planting, that should be considered when considering the deep soil, because of the fact that on-structure planting has been done very strategically to be in very strategic positions, so that it can be co-located with those communal areas, and it is identified within the voids of the building. We see this as being a very important element given the scale and the height of this proposal, both from, yes, an environmental point of view, but also from an aesthetics point of view, and also from just that amenity and the ability for the planting that is provided to really have the most maximum benefit. And we see that on-structure planting will achieve that because it has been strategic in the areas that it will be located within.
Okay, thank you. And I also have a question about the overshadowing. So there's mention in the report that the overshadowing predominantly is contained to the frame court car park and does not extend to the current Oxford Street Reserve. Can I just have some clarification that reflects the changes that were made to the structure plan last round, and the addition of the reserve area, and whether that actually now would overshadow the as yet uncreated reserve area?
Through you, Mayor Cole, due to the change in the precinct structure plan, it would overshadow part of that new area.
Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Just in relation to the on-site planting, or the on-structure planting, because there's such a significant shortfall in soil, deep soil, some of that kind of the alternate is the on-structure planting and some of it's in the voids. Do you have any comment on, I guess, the equivalence of that in the sense that if they're in building voids, they're not open landscaped areas that people can walk through? And then just follow up around, I guess, some of the experience in the city around developments proposing on-site, on-structure plantings have not really eventuated quite as expected, and what parameters do we have to actually ensure that the extent of that planting actually happens?
Through you, Mayor Cole, absolutely. I think that it's probably a balance between the planting being in those communal open spaces where people can are frequenting those spaces, as well as the voids from a viewing perspective. Also noting that there is a requirement for 80% of the plazas to be provided as canopy cover, so that would further contribute towards that increased amenity. In regards to your comments regarding the challenges of the realisation of on-structure planting, I would say that this is a very specific case where it has been looked at strategically for those specific spots at this point. Also noting that that landscape plan would need to be provided with the submitting of the development application.
Councillors, I'll just ask a few questions. Manager, if this is correct, my understanding is that despite the fact that we now have the Leederville precinct structure plan, which we could deem to be seriously entertained, we still do require the local development plan because that structure plan is not yet operational. Is that correct?
To Mayor Cole, yes, that's a very good point. The precinct structure plan, although endorsed by council, has now been sent to the WAPC. We predict that the timing for that to be endorsed by them would be between 8 to 12 months. So yes, the local development plan is required in the interim to ensure that these controls can be put in place. Also just noting, even with the precinct structure plan in place, the local development plan allows for there to be very specific controls on what is a very important site for Leederville and the city. So even within that, with that plan in place, this would still be very, very beneficial to council.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to go to some of the issues that were raised by either referral agencies or by Leederville Connect. So one of the issues that Leederville Connect raised was that they felt that some of the community benefits were limited to 10 years, but I didn't read it that way. I just wanted confirmation of that.
To you, Mayor Cole, confirming no, there is no limit to the 10 years.
Okay, thank you. And Water Corporation raised 3 issues. The first was the nil setback on the northern boundary. But my understanding is that there will be the separation via the Water Corp easement.
To you, Mayor Cole, that's right. There will be no built form on the easement, and noting that the built form policy does permit that nil setback.
Okay. They also raised the use of the road connection through to Newcastle Street as being private land, but also my reading of the application is that there's no reliance upon that private roadway.
To you, Mayor Cole, yes, confirming those comments may have been because the initial traffic impact assessment did include that as a consideration, that road, but then the applicant went back to another traffic impact assessment, not including that road due to the fact that it is a private road, it can be closed at times, and another additional traffic impact assessment will be done on the development application.
Thank you. And the other point they raised was the Southern Plaza being significantly overshadowed. My understanding is it has been looked at by a landscape architect, and that the planting selected would be appropriate for the orientation. But do you have any further feedback on that?
To you, Mayor Cole, yes, the details around that would be worked out through that landscaping and public realm plan that would need to be required to be submitted through the development application process.
Okay. And just a comment in relation to the delegation in the report, noting that objections, etc., just probably needs to change to say an LDP will always is not delegated to administration. So just by virtue of being an LDP is why it's being considered by council. And I thought it would also be useful to have some wording around the statutory timeframe where we're sitting with that, and that would actually be useful. Lots of the other questions have been dealt with. I just had one on noise and whether there needs to be some, whether there could be or should be flagging of the potential for Leederville as a secondary centre to in the future become an entertainment precinct, something that we have discussed. And I think we have seen the potential for Leederville to be that in the future, and whether there needs to be any reference to that in the local development plan, given that this is a significant injection of residential dwellings, some 250 potentially, into the heart of the town centre.
To you, Mayor Cole, yes, did investigate this. It was administration's recommendation that 0.4.12 noise in the development controls of the LDP was included for that reason. We did not go as far to comment on the entertainment precinct, as that it is not one at the moment, but we're specific on the entertainment venues and looking at not just the noise generated from the development, but the noise of the surrounds and what impact that would have inward facing to the development.
Would there be any consideration of taking that a step further to say that Leederville does have the potential to be a noise, an entertainment precinct in the future? I think when we've looked at what the City of Perth has been through with Northbridge, it was felt by the council that of all of our town centres, this would be the most appropriate and currently has the least amount of residential dwellings in the heart of the town centre.
Team Echo will investigate that through the briefing notes.
Yeah, thank you. Any further questions? Okay, thanks everyone. We'll move on. The next item raised during public question time was 6.2, which is tender number IE 108 of 2021, tree watering and tree planting. I was looking at Councillor Loden, might invite him in. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the additional information provided through the confidential attachment in response to the deferral motion of this one previously. I think that addressed the concerns I had. So I'm not going to request to go behind closed doors again. I just wanted to confirm that where we are considering these options, that there'll be that sort of information, that contextual information provided for future decisions, because I think that really helps to inform the decision-making process for council.
Through Mayor Cole, we have gone through the templates of how we put together these reports on tenders for council, and we intend to bring some suggested modifications for discussion with council at a forthcoming council workshop. I think in November might be the next one.
Thank you.
Councillor Hallett, you had a question?
Oh, it's just in relation to Dudley's query about confidentiality of certain documents, and at what point can some of this be put in the public realm?
Through Mayor Cole. So the confidential attachment is confidential because it contains, because we've done a comparison, it contains the tendered price, which is confidential. But what I can do is I can look at the information and presenting in a different way that doesn't need to be confidential, I think.
Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Nicole. It's about the confidential attachment, but it can be taken on notice. So I'm just wondering if I can ask that now. Yeah, I guess the breakdown that we received for how much it's going to cost to provide this in-house was quite brief. I was wondering if just some additional information around the calculations for those sums can be provided in the briefing notes, just some working. Doesn't have to be many words.
I would like to also request the same and ask whether the components of the costings could be further broken down, please. And if that can be made public, that would be encouraged.
Yeah, through my call, there's a huge workbook behind, a bunch of spreadsheets behind those calculations. So I'll go back to the team that did it and see what we can present so you get a bit more detail.
Thank you. Any further questions on the tender? Any requests to discuss the confidential attachments at the end? No? Okay, we can consider that dealt with for the evening. Yes, no problem, CEO. The CEO has asked if I could bring forward the update on homeless meal service provision at World Square, which is item 6.1, so that our Safer Vincent officer may be able to go home. That's a fair request. So welcome, Cara. Are there any questions in relation to item 6.1? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Cara. Welcome, Cara. I just wanted to just understand with the point 3, whether that should specifically note it just refers to outreach services, and just thought that at a minimum reference to Noongar Outreach, particularly considering that it was referred to specifically in the report. Would that be possible?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, that's possible. We can do that.
Just also want to get an understanding if has there been contact with some of the residents who raised concerns with council initially to provide an update on their on-ground experience. Has that been done?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes. We invited a resident and business owner of that area to our recent Safer Vincent meeting, and we've also had administration has also had contact with other residents and businesses in the area who have confirmed the report, what's in the report.
Might need to come back to you, Mayor, because I did make a note on being specific with the time frame, but I didn't actually refer to which of the points. So wait and see if anybody.
All right, we'll come back to you when we ask questions in the intervening period. Who has got a question? Right, I'll ask one. I was just interested, and this is slightly outside. It's related, and it is something that's been very much attached to World Square. But given that the city has funded through our collaborative community grants a outreach worker at World Square, and then we backed that up with additional funding through the COVID relief provided through the Leederville Gardens Trust. I'm just wondering whether we could get some advice about the value of that during the time it was provided, which is, that's probably, and it could come through a different form rather than this particular report, although it is linked to World Square, and some advice about whether that should be reconsidered as part of our collaborative community grants going forward, given the changes that have occurred at World Square since the meal service has been removed.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can take that on notice.
Thank you. Councillor Fotakis, have you remembered?
Oh, look, yeah, it's the problem of actually taking notes. We're trying to also take phone calls, but the report mentions the 22 reported incidents since July 2021, and I suppose last year was an unusual year with shutdowns, and certainly around that period. So I just want to get an understanding, and I know at a recent safety forum, the WA police did mention that there'd been a reduction overall in some sort of the criminal incidents, not saying that these incidences have all been criminal incidents, but the period of a lot of the problems that have been experienced have been well before that. So I did want to get a little bit more of an understanding of tracking, beyond just 12 months compared to 12 months of really how, I suppose, how those improvements are tracked over the last couple of years, if that's possible to get that sort of information.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can get some data for you for the briefing notes.
Thank you. That's it.
Councillors. Also, Cara, I was interested in the Moor Street precinct, the which came from the Perth City Homelessness Response Framework and the accredited site that's referred to in the report. And I had heard that there was a period of trial, and I just wondered what the status is. Has it been approved as a permanent, ongoing precinct and food service, site for provision of services, or has the City of Perth updated the status of that site? Is it seen to be something that will be continuing in the longer term?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's an ongoing initiative. I believe the original trial, which started in February 2020, has been extended to February 2022, and that's an ongoing initiative.
That's good news, thank you. Are there any further questions on this report? Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you very much, Cara. You can go and live your life outside of the chamber. We can't. It's a pleasure to be here. Okay, so that takes us, and we'll just go and move sequentially through the remainder of the items, which brings us to 5.3, creation of the City of Vincent Animal Local Law. Something to be very excited about. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Just wondering about the scope of the local law. And I know that there's a Animal Welfare Act that covers a whole range of things that are relevant to this as well. But is there scope within this type of local law to include things around density requirements and space for chickens, etc., that I recall from a workshop were in some other local laws? So basically just welfare considerations for animals as well.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the law is made under the Public Health Act. So in terms of those sorts of considerations, there needs to be a public health reason why. I guess we can look into that specific question further and provide a response in the briefing notes, but I'm fairly sure it's limited to what is only relating to a public health nuisance.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a question in relation to how this new local law would intersect with the proposed new state government legislation, the CAT Act, and whether you can give us some updates on the progress of that.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, it's just going to be following whatever the state government produce. We're reluctant to produce our own local law in relation to particularly curfews, given that the state legislation could come and supersede that at any point. Unfortunately, we don't have a time frame of when they're expecting to do that, but it is something that is due to be introduced soon. So we're prepared to wait until that comes through as state legislation and then follow as suit.
Thank you. And so has there been any indication of what type of curfews that legislation might propose, or is that still being determined at state government level?
Through you, Mayor Cole. It is still being determined. There's a few that have got curfews already, such as Fremantle, I believe. So they can choose to do their own if wish, but there's no specific times set as yet for a particular curfew, whether they make that a blanket curfew across all local governments or allow scope for local governments to choose their own times.
Thank you. And so once that legislation is enacted, will it be necessary for us to update, to amend our local law to reflect that, or will we simply have a head of power under the legislation to enforce?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct. Yeah, under the state legislation, the CAT Act, we can administer that under that.
And I should say thank you, Chris Dixon from Ranger Services I think first time at the council meeting. Yep, well done. We haven't quite finished with you yet, but doing very well. Are there any further questions? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to reference whether the report, seeing we have our community and stakeholder engagement policy in place, whether the report should also refer to that policy when referring to consultation.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can include that in the report.
Thank you. Just also wanted to get an understanding of how the penalties are arrived and how they're determined, and also to, I suppose, the relationship of this local law and how amounts are determined. I mean, one item that came up with, I suppose, people failing to pick up their dog poop. And the Litter Act, is my understanding, I just didn't have time today to delve into it. I thought it was a $200 fine, but we're giving $150. So I just wanted to see whether we need to be consistent with other state legislation on determination of those fines, but how we actually arrive at those amounts.
Through you, Mayor Cole, those penalties are sought through looking through other local governments and what their penalties are in similar offences, but we can also review that further and provide an update.
Thank you. And I just also wanted to understand that we had within the penalties, I suppose the sections pertaining to dogs, and then just a general animals. So were we sort of like drawing in from a model local law that came from, like you said, with other councils being applied through Welga? Because I noticed that even comparing to the City of Cambridge, there were some differing penalties. And I did, look at sort of some of those penalties and, looked at whether some of them did actually relate through to, welfare issues like whether it was infestation of the property with fleas, or whether we're looking at the animals. So I just did want to get an understanding of really what the intent of, are we looking at the property? I suppose we're looking at it from the health point of view, or are we looking at it from the welfare of the animal?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, a lot of the penalties have been carried across, but we have modelled them off some other local governments that have a combined animal local law. There are quite a few that have a combined animal local law, also a few that also have specific cat, dog and health animal local laws. So we've tried to get a broad scope of all of them, but we can just review it further and provide more information.
Yeah, thank you. I just also, not that I'm inviting extending, I suppose, how we deem animals, but I did also note that some actually are looking at small animals kept as pets, and that includes animals such as rabbits and ferrets and guinea pigs and rats and mice and other domestic rodents, and which wasn't included in this. So was that considered or not considered? I just want to get an understanding, our sort of, I suppose, inclusion of the animals within this local law was quite narrow by comparison. Yeah.
Through you, Mayor Cole, when we drafted this local law, we looked at what provisions existed in the previous City of Vincent Health local law. So there previously weren't provisions relating to those kinds of animals, but nor have we even received complaints about the keeping of those sorts of animals from a public health perspective. What I would say is that, say, if one particular animal hasn't been included, we can always fall back on general nuisance provisions in the Public Health Act.
Yeah, thank you. That's all I need.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you. I note that the Act requires an absolute majority decision in relation to dog exercise areas, and I was just wondering if I've missed it, forgive me, if we could get reference to those previous decisions, although the documents that were approved in relation to dog exercise areas in the briefing notes, that would be great. And then I just had a couple of questions in relation to 2.4 that deals with dog exercise areas. Section 2.4 2A states the dog exercise area may not be used in certain circumstances. And just wondering whether this should reference that a portion of the dog exercise area may not be used in certain circumstances. My reading of the wording would be that this would continue to effectively exclude dog exercise in the whole area where part of the area is being used for one of these purposes, and this isn't current practice across the city. So just whether I could get some comment on that now or in the briefing notes.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, we can provide something in the briefing notes.
Thank you very much. And then the second one related to section 2.4 in number 1, where it talks that a dog exercise area cannot be a pathway, and just, or thoroughfare, I think it says, and then just noting that there are pathways within city parks that also act as dog exercise areas, and just how those two things would relate to each other, and whether some additional clarity may be warranted somewhere to specify when a pathway isn't a pathway for the purpose of this law, perhaps.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. Yeah, we can look at that wording and provide something in the notes.
Thank you. I had a question about the number of chickens being permitted. The maximum is proposed to change from 12 to 6. And I wondered if well, first I was just sort of interested in exploring the rationale and whether there would be circumstances where 12 would be okay, and whether there's a mechanism to say you can have 6, but if you want more, up to a maximum of whether it's 12 or whatever it is, then there are additional requirements or there's additional something, because for those that do have a large property, for example, it might still be appropriate that they have 12 chickens.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. I'm glad you've brought that up. In attachment 3, it does have a bit of an analysis of what the maximum allowed numbers of poultry are in certain local governments. And it does sort of correlate that the ones that would have higher, larger properties have a higher number of poultry allowed. Look, I really just think from a public health risk management perspective, that having 7 chickens over 6 is not going to automatically deem it to be a nuisance. So I am supportive of having some wording inserted into the local law to enable some discretion around that requirement. We do have small lots in Vincent, so I think in most circumstances 6 is probably appropriate, but I'm not against having that discretion to permit more.
For example, if it is really about lot size, could we have some, a bit of an examination of criteria around, if your lot size is X or your open space is X square meters? I'm just wondering what would it be that would then mean the public health impacts were reduced?
Through you, Mayor Cole, what I would suggest is even having lot sizes could still limit the numbers. There's always there could always be that scenario if somebody's got 8 chickens, they could keep them meticulously in a very clean sort of a way and not create any nuisance or problem for the neighbours at all. Whereas if somebody has 2 and then they're being irresponsible and they are causing a nuisance, so it's not necessarily the numbers that are the factor. I would support having that discretion and just having some risk management embedded into that decision making, and not fully relying on a prescriptive requirement.
So would that mean then, manager, that you might have something that said everyone's entitled to have 6, but if you want more, and then do we still name a maximum? So if it is 12, then you must seek approval, or you must, what would the process be?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, what I would suggest is just to, we can look at it, including a provision to where the manager of the responsible area has the discretion to approve higher numbers, probably in with consideration to best practice guidelines that exist around the keeping of poultry and animals, for example, from the Department of Primary Industries or societies like what we've done with beekeeping with the Apiarist Society, where we look at best practice guidelines.
Okay, that sounds like a potential solution. I'd be very interested in that feedback. Thank you. Are there any further questions on the animal local law? Okay, and it is for advertising, so it'll be very interesting to see what comes back from the community. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chris, and thank you, Manager of, I think we keep calling you Manager of Health, but it's Manager of Environment and Wellbeing. Built Environment and Wellbeing, almost. Okay, thank you. So the next item is 5.6, Amendment to Council Delegations, Delegation to issue infringement notices under the Building Regulations 2012. Oh, sorry, I thought we'd just, yes, my apologies. We'll step back to 5.5. While you're sitting there, we don't want you to go away just yet. Public Health Plan 2020 to 2025 Annual Review. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Only a quick one. Just in the first highlight in the report about the governance framework, it mentions about priority health outcomes reported in 74 out of 161. I'm just wondering, is that all of the reports or the reports that reported on any public health implications? Just because I know there were some reports that have missed that over that time.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, that's reports where there has been a response under that section where the wording has been included to provide information on public health implications.
Councillors, Councillor Patakis.
Thank you, Mayor. In the report, it refers to a waiver of rates, but can I get a dollar value on that, please, so we know what the not only the number of organisations, but the actual dollar value in rates that we've waived. And also with regards to Beatty Park Leisure Centre, I think well done getting to 3,500 memberships. That's awesome. And I know that it's we're looking at a report, and but I would like to get some understanding as to the work that's being done to build the capacity to ensure that we maintain our high level of service and access to classes and facilities. I think, well, that's a really great achievement. It did raise a little bit of concern in terms of how we are moving forward to really be able to maintain that quality of service that our communities come to enjoy.
I assume that's a noted.
Apologies. Yes, I'll take that on notice and provide some responses in the briefing notes. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? I just want to ask a quick one about smoke-free town centres. Have we consulted with the City of Perth on William Street?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, we have not consulted with them as yet. We're still in the process of looking at the 300 and I think now 344 submissions we've received within Vincent. I think with William Street, there will be further consultation that would need to be identified.
That's a good response. Okay, that was all for me. Anything else? No? Okay, shall then move to item 5.6, Amendment to Council Delegations, Delegation to issue infringement notices under the building regs of 2012. Any questions? I do have a question. What's happened in the intervening 2.5 years where there hasn't been a delegation?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we have not had a need in that 2.5 years to issue an infringement. We just recently did a little internal review and just in case we were going to issue one and realised we couldn't. So that's why this report has come up.
Well, that was lucky. Okay, any further questions? Okay. 5.7, response to notice of motion, local planning scheme number 2, amendment regarding tobacco outlets. Does this also need to say and local planning policy in the title? You know, I love the titles to be descriptive, and the recommendation goes to a local planning policy.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, I think the title is just exactly as per the title of the notice of motion.
Fair enough. Oh, yes. During question time, I neglected to ask whether we'd had any written submissions. Are we still reading them out? No. Okay. So just to note on this one, we did have a submission from the council, Cancer Council, strongly in favour of this. So we're taking questions now. Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Just wondering, in terms of the advocacy item in the original motion, is there a way that we can time, this is more to probably the Mayor and CEO, time that with any proposed scheme changes in terms of getting health and planning to kind of influence the department? Because I know the report says that the department wasn't necessarily in favour, but wouldn't wouldn't necessarily prevent it happening.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in short, yes. Yeah, the timing of that advocacy is very important, and it would be timed with council referring proposals for approval to the commission.
Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Alex, sorry, Councillor Alex.
Thank you, Mayor Emma.
Alex Castle. So just going full format tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a question, and perhaps this is something that comes in more detail at the next stage, as to how we will define a retail outlet or a use that is predominantly selling tobacco as opposed to selling it as an ancillary item. I'm thinking of Woolies and Coles that do sell tobacco items, but clearly sell lots of other things. And how will we draw the line?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, the existing restricted premises definition kind of does that already. So we would use that as a basis, but we'd definitely need to sit down and test different scenarios to ensure that it covers off on what we're trying to cover off on, which is premises that are basically advertising tobacco through their nature, which is really the fundamental issue. So yeah, that would definitely come at the next stage, but fortunately we already have a restricted premises definition that that through the state government has been tested and hopefully already does that, but we'll definitely be testing it further.
Thank you. Yeah, and I suppose just to test that to ensure we don't create loopholes that make it easy to avoid these requirements.
Councillors, Councillor Vatakis.
Just an understanding through Mayor of the expected timing on the new planning policy referred to in point 1.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, the team has advised that they could do that this financial year. So we're hoping that before the end of the year, early next year, there'll be a discussion paper around the detail sent out through the policy papers, and the option for a workshop to discuss it, and then a draft policy would come up to council for approval, hopefully early next year.
Thank you. It'd be good to discuss the objectives of the policy early doors. Yep. Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. We'll move on to item 5.8, extension of lease, North Perth Special Needs Shalom Coleman Dental Clinic at 31 Sydney Street, North Perth. Any questions, Councillor Vatakis?
I just had a comment. Point
Taking
2.
questions,
Oh,
not
sorry.
comments.
Oh, okay. Is there not a typo in point 2.1 of the expiry date? Should that not be 2022, March 2022?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in short, yes.
Good pickup. Thank you, Councillor Takis. Any further questions? Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a query. So it's to my read from the notes provided that all the patients are moving to Fremantle by December 2021 and all the equipment will be removed by that time. So if we didn't extend the lease, who would be impacted by that?
Through you, Mayor, I think in essence the special needs clinic has asked for an extension of time to lessen, and the Minister has asked for an extension of time to lessen the impact that it will have on their particular special needs clients, where they've explained that it's exceptionally difficult to get their clients to these appointments as it is, and sudden changes of environment can be quite unsettling. So they felt that the longer period of time that they could be there, the better, and minimise the change impact across to Fremantle. My understanding that Fremantle doesn't quite provide the level of service that they can provide at North Perth, and that will also impact on the timeliness of some of the services to those clients.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm just looking at Councillor Loden's expression on the Zoom. I think there is a point of confusion here that we did receive a transition plan from the Department of Health in which accords with the requirement to get a 3-month extension to the end of this calendar year. So we did receive that transition plan, which said that they would vacate by the end of the year in order to get to 3 months. Simultaneously, we received a related but separate request from the Minister for Health for Council to consider extending that transition period so it can continue to provide some services and take some appointments at North Perth, while also having some ability to provide some appointments at the Fremantle Clinic as well. So I'm just wondering if that was the point of Councillor Loden's question.
Yeah, I think so. So if I'm understanding correctly, they could, if we forced them, they could be gone by the end of the calendar year. We said, no, you can't have more time, but they would prefer to have more time to make it easier to transition over the client base because of that challenge around shift. Like ultimately, they're all going to need to shift, but giving them a greater amount of time will make that easier. Is that correct?
That is correct, through the Mayor.
So we're not going to see an empty box on the 1st of January, even if this is extended. That's right, because they'll continue to service clients there for a period of time to as a smoother transition.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, and part of that does relate to having to expand the capacity at the Fremantle site, and this will enable to minimise the disruption to bookings and appointments, because I don't think they'll be at their full capacity at Fremantle for some time yet. They need to expand that capacity at Fremantle, and this will help smooth that transition process.
Thank you.
Could we have something like an early vacation clause? Like if they vacate the premises and are no longer operating from there. I know that this is in 3-month intervals, but sort of providing a further 3 months and then a further 3 months, but we're saying that we're not going to start our capital works on the lot until the full 6 months. So we are holding back our works by the full 6 months, regardless of the lease being 3 + 3. And if they were to vacate because they needed equipment to be relocated to Fremantle, I think that's still a bit of a question for me. I'm just unsure about, do we absolutely have to commit to not starting the works until probably we should say July 2022, noting that we have to update the Attorney General and the transitional arrangements, but then we're locking ourselves in to not being able to start work earlier if they were to vacate, or is it the administration's view that we shouldn't proceed until that date anyway, because we're now wanting to do it simultaneously with the other lot, which is still very much dependent on Kids Galore having constructed and fitted out and moved their whole operation down the road?
Through you, Michael, yes. So our current thinking is because of the progress of Kids Galore's purchase and development approval for their new site, that'll radically bring forward Kids Galore vacating their site, less than the maximum 5 years. And then the time aligns between the dental clinic leaving the site and Kids Galore hopefully vacating the site in next financial year, so we could do 100% of the works at once.
Could we actually go to Kids Galore during this week to seek some confirmation from them about where they think they'll be in June 2022? Because I think if they say that's our goal, but we can't commit because we haven't commenced our construction, the construction industry is slowed, and they can't commit to that, where we could potentially be holding back on starting works longer on this particular lot, anticipating something from Kids Galore that, you know, is, for me, I would like a little bit more clarity around their time frame, given they're not obligated to leave on that date.
Yes, through Michael, we can ask for that update from Kids Galore, which my understanding was that they were planning to finalise their construction and occupancy of the new site by the end of next calendar year. But that is all subject to building timeframes, and there being no delays. So I will ask for an update and include that in the briefing notes.
Okay, so that's in next calendar year, which is December, but we've been talking about doing site works in July.
Through Mercon, just to clarify that we would be doing the site works next financial year. We still need to have certainty around access to the entire site. And then there'd be a procurement process for demolition, clearing, and then construction of the park.
It's just that's sort of two different points there. There's the issue about when Shalom Coleman Dental Clinic is moving and when we could proceed down our path that is set to clear half of the park. And then there's a question of, do we then hold back even further to wait for Kids Galore to clear the site so that we do both together? Like that's sort of those things I think need to be potentially clarified and separated with further information for council on Kids Galore's plans, because the two have now been linked.
Yes, to you,
I
Michael.
know that is a question because I'm seeking additional information.
Thanks. Through you, Michael. Yes, we are in touch with Kids Galore around the construction of their new site, and we'll contact with them this week to seek for further clarification on their building plans.
I'm trying not to labour this point, but if you could foresee a situation where Shalom Coleman had transitioned away sometime between January and April next year, and then the City of Vincent could continue to do the initial works as planned on their lot, on the lot on which they have been located. I guess my question is, do we run the risk of further delaying opening up that public open space if we're saying we're not going to proceed on any basis until Kids Galore have moved off? Because that is the question is that a risk in terms of even further time frame delays of actually achieving that open space at that lot, considering we've already approved a 6-month extension of lease to Shalom Coleman Dental Clinic, and that this is a further 6 months. And if Kids Galore were not planning, or their plans were to be relocated by December 2022, that would add up to an 18-month delay to the original plan.
Through Mayor Cole, I'll check with the parks team. There are two options. If hypothetically the dental clinic vacates at the middle of next year, we could immediately demolish that building and irrigate and turf that area so it becomes grassed and open, but not proceed with the hard infrastructure works, the playground on top of it. Then wait for Kids Galore to vacate, hopefully within 6 months following, demolish their building, and then construct all the hard works on top of the entire site.
If I just might add as well, Mayor Cole, the recommendation wasn't designed to stop council and the city of Vincent from doing the works as soon as the dental clinic relocates. So we can ask about, we can look at an early vacation clause. I think that's a really good suggestion. There's nothing in this recommendations that's saying that we couldn't do the works earlier than the time frame that's set out in the transition plan, and the Attorney General would be very supportive of that occurring. So this recommendation is not prohibiting us. I think there's clearly a separate conversation around when the works occur, but there's nothing stopping us from using the budget that we have currently for this financial year to do those works as soon as the dental clinic relocates.
Thank you, Director. I appreciate that. So in summary, if we had in the transition plan that we were going to move to do part or all of the works to the public open space, we could say no later than, and then do it earlier if we needed to. Could that wording be incorporated?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, we can have a look at that between now and next week and update the wording if we think it's going to resolve that issue. It may well do.
So just in terms of the recommendation before us, I've gone into an attachment and I have to work my way back. Will we have a copy of the amended transition plan as an attachment so that we could see the impact and the wording within, given that we're making an amendment to the transition plan?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, the proposal was simply to change the date. But we can update that. I take the point that it's not clear that the works could start earlier, so we can have a look at that wording and send through attach a new transition plan that sets all of that out.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. Yes, second the request for the actual amended transition plan to be attached with the report as it is referenced in the recommendation. So the Fremantle Dental Clinic, is this considered to be the alternative site to the Special Needs Dental Clinic in North Perth?
Through you, Mayor, not long term. They're planning, I understand, to build a new premises in Manning.
And sorry, just to refresh my memory, the delivery date for that Manning premises is June 2022 or post that?
Through you, Mayor, post that.
So the alternative site that is going to be the site that will be transitioned to has already been found. Not the, obviously the thing is that the recommendation says that the purpose of the extension is to allow further time to secure an alternative site. And my understanding is that that alternative site has been secured in the Fremantle site. It is not a long-term alternative site, but it is an alternative site. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, that's correct.
Mr. Corello spoke at a previous meeting in relation to the transition of patients. It wasn't clear to me from what he said at the meeting that patients would actually be attending the clinic in January. From my understanding of what the words that he said was that that after December that they would be making bookings, that people would be coming back, that the staff would be coming back and making bookings for the new site. And when this was previously discussed, we requested some confirmation on that, but I didn't see that in the report. So can I request confirmation that it is intended that patients will be attending the site between January and June 2022, rather than just staff, administrative staff on site to make a booking? And also, can I also get an understanding, as as to whether the same dental practitioners that are there currently will be on site, or whether those dental practitioners and staff will have transitioned to Fremantle. And if so, and if I've missed it in the transition plan, I'm sorry, what days it would be working on? Because I'm presuming that they're not hiring new professional staff to operate the two sites concurrently. I'm happy to get that information, that's the case. But will the professional staff be in Fremantle or North Perth, or will there be new people hired?
Through you, Mayor, I can do a note for the briefing notes.
Are there any further questions? Okay, thank you. We'll move to item 5.9, car parking licence for Minister for Education for the School of Isolated and Distance Education. Any questions? Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Do we, my understanding is this currently is operating as it's currently proposed under this because it's extending. Do we have any occupancy data for this in the after hours period? Like, is it well utilised?
Through you, Mayor, I'm not aware of that information. I could probably seek it out and put it in the briefing note if we have it.
Thank you. And is there any, the access point is off Oxford Street, is that right? For the, if you're using it after hours?
Yes, I believe so, through you, Mayor.
Councillor Loden.
Yes, sorry, I was having some issues toggling my mute there. Technology is great until it's not. The other one was just, do we have any signage on the Oxford Street side that indicates that there's public parking that's available during those times?
Through you, Mayor, not at the moment. I understand that the new licence agreement will mean that the parking will be extended from football crowds to the general public. So that signage isn't in place at the moment, but once the licence is in place, we could update signage so members of the public will know that those spaces are available at certain times.
And when you say we could put signage in, does that mean that we will?
Through you, Mayor, yes.
Thank you.
This is very interesting because as the Executive Manager of Government says, it's moving from football, a reciprocal arrangement with football visitors and members using it to the general public. So I have a question about the use during these after hours, and how do we prevent, say, for example, someone working in a shop parking all day? And could we potentially trial this as our first ticketless Easy Park app, so that could we have some restrictions around extent of parking during those hours? And could we use the Easy Park app as part of that? Just to help consider and deal with the fact that you could have people parking all day and not having a turnover all day or all night. And that, and secondly, given that this would be another fantastic addition to after hours parking for the public in Leederville, in addition to the ABN building, could we update the Leederville parking map and distribute that to our local businesses and have that available on our website and promote it a lot?
Thank you, Mayor. I believe we can manage all of those things.
Particularly interested, this is probably more for Director Murphy, because we have talked about trialling ticketless car parks, and I can see this as being an opportunity for that to potentially happen.
So if I add a bit more, Michael, if that's okay. So in the day, you have to have a permit to park there, and there's a variety of people who are allowed to park there, and there's a variety of permits. So that's how we check it. I think some of them might be e-permits now as we move away from paper permits. You know, we're starting to do that for non-residential as well. I think after hours, it's unrestricted, so people can park there through the night. I think that's correct. So the question for us that we've been toying with is, do we now look at charges or restrictions or number of hours? So that's something that parking are looking at in the context. At the moment, if I'm honest, it's the best kept secret in Leederville. You can park there in the evening for free. So A lot of people think it's for the football club and all those other things, but after certain hours, it's a lot of free parking there. So I've just let the cat out of the bag. So we are looking at what restrictions are appropriate in that car park. So I think aside from this decision, maybe we'll look at that, bring that to a workshop.
Do we need to then have, I mean, given that it's not our land and we're potentially looking at restricting it, whether it's paid or unpaid, do we then need to have that as part of the agreement with SIDE? Given that it's their car park and particularly if it's revenue raising?
Thank you, Mayor. We'd need to go into some discussions with SIDE, and there's a potential, I think, on private land for parking stations to be established. And it's something we'd need to investigate.
It's usually through some hard fought negotiations if the Leederville car park was anything to go by in the past. All right, it's a good opportunity. I just think we need to be careful it's not parked out. Yeah. Any further questions on this? Okay. That concludes strategy and development items. We've dealt with infrastructure and environment items, so we'll move to community and business services. 7.1, repeal of disaster appeals, donations and assistance policy. Any questions? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just wondering if this policy's ever been used while it's been in place.
I'll need to take that one on notice. Thanks, Mayor Cole.
I think it was. No, I think that towards the very beginning of my time and probably in your time, yeah, no, there was definitely relief monies provided for, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll look forward to hearing
Probably
details of that.
circa 2013 and previous to that.
Okay, and perhaps that indicates why this recommendation that it's not required, because I just wanted to clarify that administration's comfortable that there's no need for criteria if a request were to come through.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, our view was that in all cases we would be bringing it to council and we would be presenting it based on the facts of the matter at the time. So we didn't feel that this was actually adding any value to the council's decision-making process.
Councillor Hallett.
And just in terms of, because it's donations and assistance, just thinking about local assistance in terms of some kind of disaster within the city, I assume we've got other processes that don't come to council to deal with that anyway.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, we have some the ability to do some immediate relief of small amounts. I think it's about $500 under the community funding policy. And anything more than that, we would work with local charities and things like that.
Any further questions? Director, I just have a question. The report references the local emergency management plan and talks about how the policy duplicates the emergency management responses. And I thought it might be useful to have a copy of that plan distributed.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I'm quite happy to do that. Yep.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Item 7.2, investment report as at the 31st of August 2021. Oh, Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. So the check on the graph on divestment, I think the numbers might be flipped around in terms of percentage of what a non-fossil fuel and fossil fuel, because I believe it's 9% non-fossil fuel rather than 90% non-fossil fuel.
Thank you for that. I'll check that and correct it in the briefing notes. Thank you.
My other question was around next time council considers the investment policy, what would be the things that we should be including to facilitate greater uptake of non-fossil fuel lending?
Aren't you considering that as part of the next item? You're just asking.
Correct.
Early. Okay.
I can get in early.
All right. Go ahead. Good question.
Yeah, I think through you, Mayor Cole, I think we've had a few discussions around, I think in the current climate, we are finding it difficult to maximise the number of non-fossil fuel investment types. And it's basically relates to a number of factors. Those banks and those lending organisations that are involved in those investment types tend to have restrictions on the amount of lending that they will provide to the city. So I'm happy to provide a little bit more detail, so I'm a bit more articulate in the briefing notes. And certainly my recommendation with regards to the policy review is that we will initially just do a tidy up in terms of the document at the moment in terms of how it's currently operating. And then my suggestion was going to be that we would spend the next 4 to 5 months actually working on looking at our investment strategy and how we can, I suppose, take a bit more of a wider and more sophisticated view of our investment approach, which will involve a change to policy and probably some professional advice to ensure that we understand the risk versus reward and how we can optimise that for fossil fuel management or non-fossil fuel management was my view.
And so one of the constraints understanding is that non-fossil fuel institutions tend to offer lower rates. Is that the main barrier, or is that you mentioned that they're unwilling to lend money?
Yeah, there's the advice I've received from the finance team, Mayor Cole, is that these lending institutions are setting limits as to how much they're prepared to lend in these particular categories. So I'll get a little bit more specific technical advice on that so that I can inform you, but there are limits in terms of a dollar amount and then also in terms of the type of investment that's available as well.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to understand. Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay, we shall move on to the item 7.3, advertising of amended policy, investment policy. Councillor Loden.
One of the categories is specific securities approved by council. Is that how we ended up with the shares?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I believe so. That's a specific type of investment that council entered into, and I think it exceeds 7 years ago. So, but that was my understanding. That's the only investment of that type that we have on our books.
And so, if council was no longer of the view that was appropriate, then we could include a resolution to sell those shares?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, at any time, council can make that resolution to sell those shares. Administration has reviewed it annually, and the way that particular share portfolio is set up is that it's currently delivering a 10 to 15 cent dividend on the shares. So it's actually been quite a good investment, and we haven't seen any need to divest from that because it has been performing quite well. But if council was of the opinion that they didn't want to be involved in that particular investment, then absolutely we can sell it at any time.
Do you know what the share price is?
Oh, I don't have that to hand, Mayor Cole, but I can certainly look that up for you and put that in the briefing notes.
That'd be good. That just helps to understand the rate of return that's achieved.
From very, very rough grey memory, I thought it was delivering something like an 11% return.
Yeah, I've got 10 to 15.
0.47% interest on our standard investments.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mayor Cole. I think it was between 10% and 15%. It was sort of oscillating between those numbers from my memory as well.
And then it's the intent.
I'm sorry, Councillor Loden, continue. You had sorry, I cut you off there.
That's right. And I was just to follow up to that. So then, and I guess part to the previous questioning, so the intent as part of this broader consideration of the next 4 to 5 months of the investment policy would be to consider purchasing additional shares in groups such as this as a way to maximise benefit for our community.
Yeah, so Mayor Cole, at the moment, we have a fairly restricted definition of how we approach investments, and we're using term deposits, which by their nature are very low risk, but also very low return. And I think with the appropriate advice, we could have a look at different investment mechanisms, including sort of balanced funds and managed funds, perhaps. And I'm just suggesting that I'd need to get some technical advice on that. But there are other investment mechanisms that are in place that allow you to have a fairly balanced approach. And for some of our funds that we want to invest for longer periods of time, that may be worthwhile. But I do think there's a considered piece of work that we'd want to do to make sure that we are making the appropriate decisions on behalf of the community.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just with regards back on those particular shares, and I think in the discussions regarding, I suppose, the percentage returns, has any of the analysis done of those shares done on their divestment work? From my understanding is that that particular bank has been looking at divestments against or into non-fossil fuel options. So has any of the assessment looked at that? And if not, could it?
Yeah, Mayor Cole, I haven't looked at that particular question with regards to the Bendigo Bank shares, so I'm happy to at least take that as an action and see if I can work that through and put something in the briefing notes.
Councillors? Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just a quick check. In the draft policy, not the marked up one, under objective, I wasn't sure. I think there might be 2 sentences that maybe have come from the template that relate to like what the objective of the policy should be, and then it goes on to actually what the objectives are. And I just, if that could just be checked and those 2 sentences removed, if possible. Thanks.
Yes, Mayor Cole, I think Councillor Gonchevsky is correct there. It's the first 2 sentences under the title objective. They do look like template related, so I can certainly remove those.
Can I just ask, I'm not trying to be radical here at all, but it says that the purpose of the policy is to ensure the city takes a conservative approach to the investment of funds, but will add value through prudent investment. If we're talking about considerations like diversifying our investments, looking at balanced portfolios, etc., that this doesn't seem to really provide the ability to do that, but just to stay the course with our current major banks and either short-term or term deposit banking. I'm just wondering if this is the minor review, are those issues going to be fleshed out more fully in a major review, and when would that be?
Yeah, so Mayor Cole, my thought with that was that this reflects our current state. So we currently operate with a conservative approach to risk, and so this is reflecting our current approach. And as I indicated a moment ago, I'm sort of thinking within, say, 4 to 5 months that we could do a deeper piece of work. And if we decided it was worth recommending an alternative approach, I would suggest that we would look at both the policy and the strategy at the same time, so that they are working together effectively.
Okay. I think it's definitely worth considering, particularly I know that there might not be any other solution and there'll be risks involved, but when you're getting 0.47%,
correct.
It might be time to look at least have a view of what other local governments are doing,
Yep.
where they're investing, what options there are available, and going to that divestment issue as well, because that's become tricky as well. So,
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Yep.
Any further questions? Okay. Okay, that takes us to item 7.4, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st to 31st of August. Questions? I'm just going to go to the issue of the MRC and wording in the report. I wondered whether we would be in a position for next month to be able to, this is a question for both yourself and Director of Infrastructure, whether we might be in a position to provide a more fulsome report on waste strategy and waste costs and the impact of this and the impact on gate fee and the when we actually get to a net positive situation. I just feel that that's a lot more information is required, and I know that has to be done in tandem with MRC, but I would like to be in a situation where we had a report that provided as much information as possible about the fact that there has been significant expenditure to terminate this processing agreement, but that the reverse of that is that we are seeing significant reduction in our operating costs, and that the RRF is held by the MRC and holds value, and that they're, you know, what potential options there are. So I'm hoping to bring as much information around that into the public realm as possible.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we have absolutely no problem with preparing that for the next month's reports. That's absolutely fine.
And through you, Mayor Cole, I've also asked the MRC directly about their arrangements to publicise the major changes that have taken place over the last few months in relation to the RRF, for that information to be on their website.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Any further questions on expenditure? I just wanted to, I know this is sitting with the audit committee, so I might ask it then, but there was that body of work requested around DevCo expenditure. And I'm interested to know how that's tracking, given there's another $110,000 on the expenditure report. Has that body of work been to status?
Through Mayor Cole, that was listed on our internal audit agenda, and that was listed as one of the priority actions for internal audit, but we haven't been successful in appointing an external internal auditor, and we have been looking at different ways to seek that external expertise, including breaking down not just a whole 6 audits that we tried to tender for, which came back well outside the budget we'd allocated for that. But we still have that allocated as the highest priority for internal audit once we have the external contractor appointed.
Thank you for that. Are we ready to move on to the next item? Okay. So the next item is 7.5 financial statements as at 31st of August 21. Any questions? Can I very quickly ask Director, that talked about revenue decreased by $250,000 because of the delay by 1 month of B Park reopening, but equally expenditure reduced by 305, which was attributed to not having to fill staffing positions. So I just would be interested to know what proportion of that was BD Park and whether they kind of almost leveled out, or what, when you look at that that decrease in and of itself, what would it actually be once you take out the costs associated?
Yeah, sure. I'll break that down, but my intuitive feel was that the manager at Betty Park has tried to keep that in balance, but I'll get the details for you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Okay, thank you. We'll move to Chief Executive Officer items. So we have 8.1 report and minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 6th of September 2021. Any questions, no, not comments, any questions? Do we need to have a bit more information on the 3 significant findings? Is that something to go through?
Through Mayor Cole, is the question about whether or not we include more
I know it's
information in the covering report?
an interim, but when so when are we expecting the auditors to come to the council meeting?
Through Mayor Cole, once they've finalised the external audit,
Yeah.
but that'll be before the end of the year.
I would need to look into the dates on that.
Potentially December.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're arriving in the organisation next week. But I'm not sure what the actual end date times
Okay.
are. End dates are.
All right.
Yeah.
It'd be good to know when we can have them here. And
Through Mayor Cole, and just to note, we were able to finalise the external audit in good time last year. Several local governments, or a large number of local governments, and I think Walga reps would be aware of this, had significant issues with finalisation of their external audit through the OAG, and that delayed the finalisation of the annual report, and their AGM will be looking to avoid that situation.
hopefully, thank you. No questions? Okay. 8.2. Sustainable Environment Strategy Implementation Plan Review and Progress Update. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I have a question about whether a particular project has been considered or could be considered in relation to a cloth nappy rebate program. Is that something that the city has ever considered, and would it be appropriate to suggest it was added to the implementation plan or perhaps in the waste strategy? That's my first question.
Through Mayor Cole, I think there should be, we do run education seminars and workshops on cloth nappies. I haven't been to one myself. I think I had direct experience of cloth nappies a long time ago.
Thank you, CEO. Actually, there's a number of councils in WA and across Australia that actually offer a rebate program, including Fremantle, East Fremantle, Augusta, Margaret River, Coburn and Melville. Some of those are in conjunction with workshops, but they offer actually a rebate to residents who satisfy various criteria, and it doesn't necessarily need to be limited to just cloth nappies. It can also include reusable sanitary underwear, nursing pads and adult incontinence underwear. So I just wasn't sure if it was something we had considered as an action under either the Sustainable Environment Strategy or the Waste Strategy, and whether it was worth considering, particularly in conjunction with the rollout of FOGO.
Yeah, so through you, Michael, the CEO is right. We definitely run education. I don't think we give a rebate, but I'll do some digging this week and I'll find out and get you an answer. And we'll maybe talk to Fremantle and some of the other councils about how they do it as well.
Through Mayor Cole, if Councillor Castle could forward any other information
I
about
will
those
do.
programs, that'd be great.
Sure.
Can I make a suggestion? Given that we're moving to FOGO and there might be less need for rebates or subsidised composting, potentially it could fall within that, or we could extend it, because I think it is nicely tied to FOGO and our waste management.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's something that we could also list for mid-year review if we wanted to explore it further. Any further comments on 8.2? Questions? Okay. 8.3 information bulletin. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. A couple of questions. Just so on page, this is the CEO through you, Mayor Cole, so on page 866, 67 is the North Perth Traffic Report comments. And effectively it says that it was withdrawn to allow administration time to liaise with main roads on the potential to access funding through the Urban Road Safety Program. And there'll be a report by March 2022. My question is that my understanding is that related to a part of what was initially in the report, which was the potential to, instead of as an alternative to the slow points, to potentially look at raised plateaus. Does that mean that the potential to divert traffic at the intersection of Alma and Leek is no longer on the administration's agenda, or would those potentially be in conjunction?
Through Mayor Cole, in the draft report to council, to the briefing agenda last month, which was then withdrawn, we did have a recommendation about a trial for a what was referred to as a diagonal diversion. That diagonal diversion wasn't the subject of the community consultation which that report had produced. It was an idea which had come out during that process, but independently, but it wasn't a specific subject of the community consultation process. That is still a live idea, but we did receive direct feedback prior to and then during the council briefing from residents on Alma Street about the proposed diagonal diversion, and it was neutral or opposed, with some other options being considered, including a full closure. So I think that proposal does require further work and examination, and that can be included in the report back to council, which can still remain an option for council to consider, including whether it is a short-term trial or subject of further consultation with the community.
Thank you for that. So as far as actually seeing something on the ground, if the idea is that would require consultation, if that doesn't come back till March 2022 and it's unbudgeted in that financial year, realistically, you're talking 2023-4. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, just to clarify the question about whether or not it's subject to full consultation for a longer term trial or a short term test for weeks or 1 or 2 months.
My understanding is that the contention that was raised during the briefing related to the length of the trial and what process would have to be gone through for it to potentially be something else if it were a trial. My question this evening relates to the fact, because that never came, there was no council decision around it or distilling of that community feedback, that if the report now doesn't come till March 2022, and that is potentially an idea or otherwise, if it then goes to consultation, even if and a lengthier trial perhaps involves some other funding or otherwise, that potentially it would get delayed until the following financial year if it was not budgeted in the, if you're talking March 22, it would appear in the potentially the 22-23 year. But I guess the question is whether that component of it could perhaps come earlier and be consulted on, because my understanding is the main roads discussion has nothing to do with anything other than the raised plateaus. Is that correct?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, separate but related, council made the decision. The March date relates to the 12-month period for the trial of the median strip on Fitzgerald and View Street, which was the council decision without going to full consultation with the community to have that in place and trial it for 12 months. So that March point provides a endpoint for that report back to council. It would be open to council to consider another trial for a longer or shorter period, and it'll be up to council to decide whether or not a period of community consultation was required, depending on how long, for instance, a diagonal diversion or another road intervention was going to be put in place for. But the example of the median strip on Fitzgerald was that we thought it was a sensible intervention given that space and the feedback we'd received, and 12 months was an appropriate time to test that and come back to council with feedback.
Through you, Michael, can I break it down a little bit further as well? So take some of the items sequentially, I think. So this currently is a budget that exists for North Perth traffic calming, I think it's called, in the Capital Works programme. And that it would be sufficient. So if council were to decide in March, a report was brought forward and they would decide to install the slow points, that money is based on installing the slow points. So there is money to do that work or to be used for something different in North Perth. Similarly with the raised plateaus.
Can I just to interject there, sorry. And I guess that I understand that the money was allocated for the slow points. If the discussion now with Main Roads is potentially as an alternative to the slow points with the raised plateaus, and the community is seeking other interventions potentially, which has been discussed in the chamber, but then withdrawn before the last meeting. And we've been told by the CEO that the intervention that was raised in the briefing requires full consultation in order for a potential trial period to be longer than 4 weeks. If it doesn't come back to March, it's just pretty much, and it needs that consultation, it's impossible to be spent in the current financial year. Is that correct?
Through my call, yeah. So I'm trying to deal with an item that isn't that diagonal diversion, if that makes sense. I'm trying to deal with the other bits that could happen or the other decisions that council could make. So yeah, it is possible to get slow points based on a March report and the budget being available. It would be possible to do that. Similarly, if Main Roads, I mean, the discussion is about them funding raised plateaus. Raised plateaus were part of the last consultation and were popular. So again, you know, we could, council can make a decision to install those, and Main Roads could, in theory, provide the funding. The difficulty for us is knowing when Main Roads, you know, will come to a conclusion about whether they wanted to fund something in North Perth and when the money might be put forward. So I suppose I'm trying to deal with the issues that are not the diagonal diversion, if that makes sense, just to put some context around it.
And just two other things. One, am I correct that if elected members were wanting to have other considerations other than the raised plateau or slow points considered prior to March, it would require a notice of motion, as administration is not planning on bringing any North Perth traffic calming measures back to council prior to March? Is that correct? Through you, Mayor Cole, well, this is a good time and forum to ask that question about whether or not there's interest from council in receiving further advice on one or more of those interventions and whether or not they do need community consultation. And just if we go back to the response to the petition, which is listed elsewhere, which was the petition from 9 signatories to not have chicanes put in on Camellia Street, that's appearing in the responses to petitions as waiting for the March date for a response. But my understanding is if we're not doing it, it's unbudgeted. Am I correct that it's not happening and therefore that should be closed out because the response to the petition is that it's no longer on the agenda for council to consider chicanes on Camellia Street? Is that correct?
Through you, Michael, it would still depend on a council decision whether or not to do it, I think. So it's difficult. So when we bring the North Perth traffic report, council would consider whether or not they would want to install a slow point there. So in that sense, that matter is not 100% closed.
Councillors, any further questions on the information bulletin? Joanne, Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor Emma. Just want to check on, I suppose, the timing of the minutes from the last Arts Advisory Group meeting, which was the 15th of September. I haven't seen a copy of those minutes enough to really be able to check them, but I am a little bit concerned in terms of the timing with the loss of one of our council members to that meeting and the potential that I won't be here for the next meeting to really be able to endorse those. So really, what's the process with those and those being able to meet next week's information bulletin? Is that a possibility at all, or is that a requirement?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's certainly a possibility, but I'll need to take that on notice and go back and discuss with the team the reason why that hasn't been circulated yet.
Thank you. With regards to the statistics for the DAs, it was great to actually see that review and the tracking and the reduction of the number of DAs over this time, that reduction of those that exceeding 90 days. But I just noticed there's been a little bit of a jump back up to that sort of 30, 35. So is there a reason for that increase? I know it's only a slight increase, but just an indication if there's some reason behind that.
Sorry, my microphone has stopped working. Yes, so we had a significant number of DAs come in towards the end of last year, and that has continued to ebb and flow. The volumes are just much higher than they've been for the last 5 or 6 years. So we've just continued to receive a high volume of applications. So that in short, that's the reason why those numbers are coming up and down. We had some challenges around staffing. We had some vacancies there. We held some positions vacant because we had assumed that the budget would be that the volumes of applications would be low this financial year, last financial year, because of COVID. The stimulus made the opposite occur, and so we had to fill those vacancies. We've had to bring the new team members up to speed, and that's taken some time. But we're there now, which is really, really positive, and that's the reason why the numbers have started to reduce. And you'll see those numbers continue to reduce over the coming months, the timeframes that is, and the number of applications over 90 days. So we're on the right track now, which is really positive.
Councillors, any further questions on the information bulletin? Okay. Just to clarify, just to check, no questions on confidential attachments. Okay, that's fine. We don't have any confidential items this evening, so therefore we can bring the meeting to an end, and thank you all for your participation, and the time is 8:41. Good night.